Welcome to my podcast, Scientist Free from Religion. This podcast has as proposal, as main idea to talk about a scientific topic, but also talk about religion. Different from the common assumption in which science and religion should be separated, here on this podcast we recognize formally that science and religion are not disconnected. Sadly, religion can be a very big threat to science. So on this podcast, the proposal is to talk about it freely, so without fear, without the illusion that they are separate topics. So we are going to cover a possible topic. Most of them will be focused on the connection between religion and science, especially to defend science. That's our goal. Our goal here is to defend science from religion and to help to make science, to spread scientific thinking, especially to defend it against religion.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into one of those huge, fundamental human questions. What's actually right? What's wrong?
Yeah, it's ancient, isn't it? For literally millennia, this was, mostly the territory of philosophy, religion.
Exactly. Their answers, whether from reason or revelation or just long tradition, they shaped everything. Laws, society, how we deal with each other. It was all about belief, custom, maybe deep thought.
But something really interesting is happening now, a kind of intellectual shift, you could say. Thinkers are looking more and more towards science and asking this, well, honestly, pretty bold question. Can science, can empirical data actually give us objective answers on morality?
It's fascinating because, well, the appeal is obvious, isn't it? It feels like an escape route from these two extremes that often dominate.
Totally. On one side, you've got moral relativism, the idea that, well, everything's subjective, which can kind of slide into nothing really matters, makes it hard to condemn anything.
Or agree on anything meaningful.
Right. And on the other end, you have rigid religious dogma, often demanding you just accept the rules, no questions asked, not much room for critical thinking or change there.
So this third path that figures like Sam Harris are championing, it's based on facts, data.
That's the promise, grounded in observable reality, not just faith or opinion. A way to talk about morality based on what we can actually know, maybe even measure. Like, imagine trying to build a bridge if strong meant something different to every engineer. They want an objective definition for moral good.
And Sam Harris is right at the forefront of this. You mentioned him. He's really pushing this idea of bridging science and these deep moral questions.
Absolutely. His big work here is the moral landscape. Back in 2010, that's where he really lays it all out.
His core argument being
that science can answer right and wrong, objectively, by measuring, well, basically human well-being. Conscious experience.
It's a huge claim.
Yeah.
Definitely got people talking.
Wow.
And arguing.
Oh, yeah. But the core idea is pretty neat, really. If we can find universal aspects of suffering and flourishing things that just are better or worse for conscious minds, then science can help us chart a course. Maximize the good stuff, minimize the bad.
Leading to an objective morality.
Yeah.
One that's not just based on culture or God.
That's the goal. Something inherent in consciousness itself.
Okay, so that's Harris's big, ambitious vision.
Yeah.
Taking morality into the lab, almost. But for this deep dive, we're not just looking at Harris. We're focusing on a specific, really sharp critique.
Right. From Jorge Guerra Pires, an article called Morality and Ethics. How come Sam Harris seems to ignore their distinction?
And it's crucial to say Pires isn't just trashing Harris's whole project. He actually gets it.
Yeah.
He sees the value in trying to build a secular morality based on well-being. He even understands why Harris might, simplify things sometimes.
Yeah.
For clarity, for impact.
Yeah, pragmatically, sometimes you cut corners conceptually to get a point across.
There's a but.
There is. Pires says a comment from someone named David Coda, plus rereading Harris, made him realize something consistent. Harris seems to use ethics and morality like they're the exact same thing.
And Pires thinks this isn't just playing with words.
No, he argues it's a really important distinction, philosophically speaking. Ignoring it mixes things up, leads to misunderstandings about what morality is and how it works in the real world.
So it's more than semantics. Pires calls it conceptual flattening. It risks, oversimplifying centuries of philosophical debate?
That, and also kind of glossing over how different cultures actually live their values, how different right and wrong can look on the ground.
Okay, so for you listening, our mission here is kind of twofold. We want to understand Harris's project, Pyrrhus himself calls it visionary and useful. But also see where it might be, as Pyrrhus suggests, incomplete. It's about understanding why this specific critique, this ethics versus morality thing, actually matters for the big picture.
So let's start by really digging into Harris's vision. Where does he begin building the science of morality?
Yeah, how does he make that jump from facts, from is to ought? That's the classic philosophical hurdle.
It is. He starts with what he sees as a totally self-evident truth, a moral axiom, basically. The worst possible misery for everyone.
Okay. What does that mean?
Imagine a universe where every single conscious being suffers as intensely as possible for as long as possible. Harris says that state is just bad, unequivocally bad. Not because of culture, not personal bias. It's a fundamental truth for conscious experience.
Like putting your hand on a hot stove, that aversion to pain isn't just like preferring vanilla. It's built in.
Exactly. It's universal. That's his point. He says if you don't grant that this ultimate suffering scenario is bad, then the word bad basically loses all meaning.
So this perfect hell is his absolute low point, the anchor.
Yeah, an anchor against what he calls trivial relativism, the idea that maybe even endless suffering is just, someone's thing. By setting this undeniable negative, he argues we can move forward. Any step away from that absolute misery is logically incrementally better.
Gives a direction, like climbing out of the deepest possible valley. Any step up is progress.
Precisely.
Okay, powerful start. But then the connection to science. How do you scientifically study something so subjective, like pain or joy? That happens inside someone's head.
Right, this is key. He introduces a distinction. It sounds a bit academic, but it's crucial between ontological and epistemological subjectivity and objectivity.
Okay, break that down. Ontological subjectivity.
That refers to facts about conscious experience itself. Your headache, my feeling of happiness, they exist subjectively inside a subject. My headache is mine, not yours. It needs my consciousness to exist.
Got it. The internal feeling itself. And epistemological objectivity.
That's about how we know things. It's the scientific method being unbiased, using reliable tools, tracking truth dispassionately.
Okay, so how do they connect?
Harris's big move is saying we can make epistemologically objective claims about ontologically subjective facts. Your headache, subjective feeling, right. But science can objectively measure things related to it. Brain activity on an fMRI, how it affects your concentration on tests, you rating it on a 1-10 pain scale. Science isn't feeling your pain, but it's objectively studying its correlates and effects.
Okay, so the fact that your hand on a hot stove causes subjective suffering is an objective fact about that subjective state.
Exactly. The badness is felt subjectively, but that it is bad for that conscious system is an objective truth. That's his bridge to bring consciousness into the realm of scientific study.
That is a critical bridge.
Okay.
But then what about words like ought and should? They usually sound like commands, like moral duty. You ought not lie. How does he fit those into a purely descriptive scientific view?
Yeah. Traditionally, ought implies some kind of command from God, reason, whatever. Harris is pretty radical here. He says he's happy to dispense with this notion of ought and is and moral duty in that traditional sense.
So he just ditches it.
He reframes it. He sees should or ought as just shorthand for objective facts about well-being.
Meaning, if he says we ought to do X, he just means doing X demonstrably leads to more well-being, and that's a scientific fact.
Exactly. It's all about empirical consequences. If you value well-being, and he assumes we all fundamentally do, to some extent, then doing the thing that increases it is simply the rational, effective path.
He has that button example, right?
Yeah, the button that has human misery instantly, no downsides. He says we really should push that button, not as a moral commandment, but as a statement of fact. The world would be objectively better in terms of conscious experience if we did.
So oughts become tied directly to measurable consequences for well-being. Makes them scientifically investigable, not just philosophical debating points.
That's the idea. Like saying, you should water that plant if you want it to live. The should depends on the goal, wanting it to live, and the fact water helps plants.
But okay, doesn't that sound a bit circular? Defining bad as worst possible misery isn't just assuming his conclusion. Suffering is bad because, well, suffering is bad.
He sees that coming. His defense is basically that all systems of thought rely on starting points, on axioms that aren't justified within the system itself.
Like in math or physics.
Exactly. Think about 1 + 1, 2, or the assumption that physical laws are consistent everywhere. These are foundational brute facts you just accept to get started. You can't prove them using only the rules derived from them.
So for Harris, well-being is good or suffering is bad is like a moral axiom, a starting point you don't derive, you just recognize.
That's his argument. He says denying the badness of the worst possible misery is like pretending to think that all squares are really round. It's playing word games, not engaging with reality. That's his philosophical bedrock.
Which brings us to his big metaphor,
Hmm.
the moral landscape. How does that picture help?
He imagines all possible conscious experiences laid out like a landscape, with peaks and valleys.
Peaks are good states, valleys are bad ones.
Right. Peaks are high points of well-being, flourishing, joy, meaning. Valleys are the low points, suffering, misery, despair. Life, for individuals and societies, is about navigating this landscape.
And science is the map and compass.
That's it. Science gives us the tools, neuroscience, psychology, sociology, to understand the terrain, to figure out what actions, what policies, what ways of living lead us towards the peaks and away from the valley.
Hey there, thanks for being around. We are going to make a small break. I'm going to share with you my books. I have several books. So far, all my book about religion, atheism, which have been published a lot, they are in Portuguese, which is my main focus. But if you are interested, you can still buy my books to help me to support my work. I have several books. For example, one book that I'd like to recommend now is AI by Sci-Fi. AI by Sci-Fi is a book that talks about artificial intelligence, which is everyone is talking about artificial intelligence with ChatGPT, all this amazing stuff that they can do. They can talk, they can create video, they can create podcasts. This podcast, for example, there are several episodes that was recorded using artificial intelligence, which is amazing how I can do that. I can even interact as you could see in several episodes. So I would like to invite you to buy my book AI by Sci-Fi. It's available on Google Books, Google Play. It's also available on Amazon. So you can buy my book. If you are interested in something a little bit more complex, a little bit more technical, I do have as well technical book. For example, I have one book about computational thinking, in which I talk about Kasparov. It's a technical book. Greg Kasparov was the first guy to be beaten by a computer. He has a very nice book about that, how artificial intelligence overturned the difference between human and artificial intelligence. So please buy my book and offer me all the support. You can find all of them on Amazon. Hopefully, in the future, I'm going to write also about religion, atheism, and science. But I do have a podcast. I do have a blog called the Scientists Free from Religion. The same name of the podcast. And you can find several already publications about several topics in which talk about science, religion, and atheism. So, hope you enjoyed the show. So, let's come back to the show.
So the challenge isn't whether right answers exist, he thinks they do, objectively, on the landscape. It's about our current ability to find them.
Exactly. Our practical limits in mapping this incredibly complex terrain. We don't have the perfect GPS yet, but he believes the landscape is real and discoverable.
It really does sound like an engineering problem.
Yeah.
Or math. And Pyers, in his critique, actually uses that lens, right? He frames Harris's project as an optimization problem.
Yeah, that's a really sharp insight from Pyers. He says Harris's moral landscape looks a lot like a fitness landscape or an objective function from optimization theory stuff used in operations research, applied math.
Okay, explain that. Morality as optimizing an objective function.
Think about designing that bridge again. Maximize strength, objective function, while minimizing cost, constraints. Pyers suggests Harris treats morality similarly. Allocate limited resources, time, money, policies, personal effort to maximize an objective function, namely human well-being, within certain constraints, biological limits, social realities, economic factors, whatever.
Wow, that shifts moral questions from just abstract talk to something potentially mathematical, measurable.
That's the implication. It makes morality seem operationalizable. It helps explain Harris's optimism, his belief that science can find better solutions. Just like engineers solve design problems, it focuses on practical outcomes.
So, if morality is like engineering, what's a counterintuitive optimization science might uncover? Something our gut might reject but the data supports.
Great question. It gets right to the core. Maybe. Well, maybe certain types of individual freedoms we cherish actually lead to lower average well-being across society in specific contexts, like public health crises or environmental issues. An optimization model might suggest regulations feel restrictive but produce a better overall outcome on the well-being metric.
Or personally, maybe chasing constant pleasure is less optimal for long-term flourishing than, say, tackling difficult challenges.
Exactly. Science might show that deferred gratification or working towards something meaningful, even if hard, leads to higher peaks on the landscape than just maximizing immediate good feelings. This framing turns morality into a search for effective strategies.
Okay, we've got a clear picture of Harris's project: science, well-being, optimization. Very modern, very ambitious. Now let's pivot to Pyrrhus's critique, his conceptual oversights. What's the main issue he flags?
Right, this is where Pyrrhus really pushes back. While he sees the elegance, he thinks Harris achieves this unified picture by basically ignoring a key distinction, the one between ethics and morality.
We use them interchangeably all the time, though. That's unethical, that's immoral. Same difference, usually. But Pyrrhus says philosophically they're different categories.
He's very specific. For Pyrrhus, ethics, maybe think capital E is the reflective philosophical inquiry into why certain principles or values hold. It's metanormative. It asks about foundations, justifications, the theory, the why. Why is well-being good? Why value compassion? That deep abstract investigation.
Okay, ethics with a capital E is the why. So morality, lowercase m, is.
That's the actual set of norms, customs, and practices within a specific community or culture at a specific time. It's descriptive, it changes, it's the practice, the what. Specific rules about diet, dress, marriage, how you treat outsiders. Think Spartan morality versus Athenian morality. Both were the morality of their place and time, but very different.
Got it. Ethics, universal theory, why? Morality, specific, cultural practice, what? So why is mixing them up such a big deal for Pyrrhus when analyzing Harris?
Because, he argues, it risks conflating culturally relative practices with universal normative principles. Harris often uses the terms interchangeably, blurring the line between making a universal ethical claim, like well-being is good, and critiquing a specific cultural morality, like a particular religious rule.
So Harris might judge a specific cultural practice using his universal standard of well-being, but without fully acknowledging that they're operating on different levels, and that the cultural practice might have its own internal historical logic, even if we find it abhorrent based on well-being.
That's precisely Pyrrhus' point. He uses Harris's example of condemning the Taliban for preventing women from reading. Harris says it's objectively morally wrong based on well-being. Pyrrhus agrees with the conclusion it is bad from a well-being standpoint, but he critiques the framing. He says Harris treats it as if it violates some universally fixed morality, when really morality as practiced is deeply plural and situated. Historically, tragically, some societies did include such practices within their accepted moral norms, tied to their structure or beliefs. While we'd critique that from a modern ethical standpoint, valuing rights and well-being, Pyrrhus says Harris doesn't properly acknowledge that historical cultural dimension. He flattens the conceptual landscape.
Okay, that clarifies the conflation issue. But Pyrrhus goes further, right? He talks about an unacknowledged normative premise. What's that about?
This is maybe the biggest challenge. Pyrrhus argues Harris's whole system, the entire moral landscape idea, rests on one massive assumption.
Which is?
That conscious well-being is the supreme moral value, that maximizing it is the ultimate goal.
And Pyrrhus says that assumption isn't a scientific finding. It's a choice, an ethical commitment you make before you start the science.
Exactly. He insists it's a normative ethical choice, not a fact derivable from science. Science can tell us what leads to well-being, maybe how to measure it, but it can't tell us scientifically that well-being ought to be our primary goal above all else. That's a value judgment.
Smells like Hume's ought gap again?
Yeah.
You can't logically jump from descriptive facts, this causes well-being, to a prescriptive command, we should maximize well-being, without adding a value premise.
Precisely. Pyrrhus argues Harris's examples, like the hot stove or the landscape, make it seem like the ought flows directly from the X. But that step, that valuing of well-being above other potential values, is a prior ethical commitment. Harris might see it as self-evident, but Pyrrhus stresses it's still a choice. Other ethical systems based on duty, virtue, rights, divine command start with different choices, different premises.
So Harris's scientific investigation of well-being is built on a foundation that is itself
Yeah,
philosophical, ethical, not purely scientific.
that's the argument. It raises big questions about its claim to pure objectivity or universality, which leads nicely into the next point, cultural variation. How does the real-world messiness of different cultures challenge this idea of a single universal moral landscape?
Ah, yes. Pyers brings up that MIT moral machine experiment.
Yeah.
That was huge, right? Millions of people, self-driving car dilemmas.
Massive study. Forced choices in unavoidable crashes. Who does the car save? Passengers or pedestrians? Old or young? Rule followers or jaywalkers? Really tough calls designed to reveal gut-level moral priorities.
And the results weren't uniform, were they? They showed real differences across cultures.
Big time. For instance, collectivist cultures in East Asia showed a much stronger preference for saving the young over the old compared to Western cultures. Other regions prioritized saving more lives regardless of age, or put more weight on whether people were following rules. Clear patterns emerged along cultural lines.
So Pyers basically asks, if you need to program different ethics into self-driving cars depending on the country, how universal can Harris's moral landscape really be? How does that account for this pluralism?
It's a powerful challenge. If Harris's landscape implies one objectively right answer for maximizing well-being, the experiment suggests otherwise. It shows that how well-being is defined, what aspects get prioritized, survival versus future potential, order versus individual life, and how it's weighed against other values.
Wow.
While it seems deeply shaped by culture.
So maybe different cultures are climbing different peaks, or they don't even agree on which peak is the highest.
That's the implication. The lived reality of morality seems much more varied and complex than a single map might capture.
Okay, so we have conflating ethics, morality, the hidden normative premise, cultural variation. What's the last big critique? Pyers levels, something about missing dimensions.
Yes. Pyers argues that by reducing morality solely to measurable well-being, Harris inevitably leaves out crucial ethical dimensions, things like dignity, autonomy, integrity, and meaning.
Things that are absolutely core to being human. But yeah, how do you measure dignity with a brain scan? Or quantify the value of autonomy if it doesn't always lead to maximum happiness scores?
Exactly. Pyers points out these values are central to human experience but resistant to straightforward quantification. A purely well-being-focused system, he suggests, might theoretically justify actions that compromise these values if it produced a net gain in aggregate happiness.
Like sacrificing some individual rights for the greater good in terms of average well-being.
Potentially. But an ethics that holds dignity or autonomy as intrinsically valuable would resist that trade-off, even if it meant slightly lower overall happiness scores. Pyers argues that ignoring these harder-to-measure aspects diminishes the richness and responsiveness of ethical inquiry.
So the moral landscape, by focusing only on quantifiable well-being, might be missing some really important features, like deep canyons of indignity or peaks of profound meaning.
That's the concern. It offers potentially an incomplete map of what constitutes a truly good ethical life, like mapping a city only by its roads and ignoring the buildings and parks.
Okay, that's a really thorough breakdown of Pyers' critique. But Harris himself does engage with these tough philosophical questions, doesn't he? He pushes back. Let's look at how he responds.
Oh, absolutely. He tackles them head on. For instance, that Atlantis fallacy charge from Alex O'Connor, the idea that Harris defines good as well-being, but might be missing what people really mean by good, like pointing to Venice and calling it Atlantis.
Right, how does Harris counter that? Does he think he is capturing everything important?
His response is basically, okay, tell me what I'm leaving out. He argues that with Dennett and free will, he could point to specific things Dennett omitted that people care about. But with well-being, he suggests everything people value, even religious ideas of heaven and hell, ultimately cashes out in terms of conscious experience, positive or negative states. He challenges critics to define good in a way that doesn't eventually relate back to conscious experience.
And he also brings up that double standard between how we treat ethics versus, say, physics, right?
Yes. This clearly frustrates him. He says, look, if a creationist challenges physics, physicists don't suddenly doubt physics exists. They just say the creationist isn't playing the same game. But in ethics, if the Taliban has a different morality, people hesitate. They ask, who are we to judge? Harris finds that specious.
He thinks we can judge based on
universal suffering and flourishing,
Yeah.
based on what we know about well-being. He thinks the reluctance to call out harmful moral systems is as illogical as being reluctant to call out bad physics. He wants moral facts to be taken as seriously as scientific facts.
Okay, strong rejection of relativism there. But what about the ought problem again, the motivation part? If moral truth doesn't automatically make you want to follow it, where does the drive come from?
Harris acknowledges people think moral truth should be motivating, but he's happy to ditch that idea. He thinks it's just an unrealistic picture of the human mind. Moral facts about well-being exist, he says, whether or not people are motivated to act on them.
Like, knowing how to lose weight doesn't mean you'll skip the ice cream.
Exactly his analogy. Knowing the facts, eating less leads to weight loss, is separate from having the desire or motivation to act on them, especially when you desire conflicting things, like ice cream. The existence of the truth isn't negated by lack of motivation.
Okay, but then the really tough question. Why should I care about others' well-being? Especially if my own well-being seems maximized by ignoring theirs. Like that arms manufacturer example.
His first answer is practical. Most people do care, unless they're psychopathic. Our lives are interwoven. Love, friendship, cooperation, these are sources of our own well-being. We generally prefer happy people around us. Society works better that way.
But the hypothetical arms dealer stipulate his personal well-being is genuinely maxed out by profiting from war, and nothing can change his desires. Why is he immoral from Harris's perspective?
Harris has a layered, pretty stark answer. First, society might just brute force it. If someone's actions are harmful enough, indigestible, like a rogue AI, society imposes consequences, laws, prison. Your personal optimization doesn't get a free pass if it wrecks everyone else.
Okay, practical societal response. But philosophically?
Philosophically, Harris argues this person doesn't know what he's missing. He's cognitively closed off from higher, more beautiful states of consciousness available on the landscape states, linked to compassion, connection, creativity.
So even if the arms dealer feels great, he's stuck in a kind of suboptimal state. Viewed from above, his actions are bad for the collective, and he's missing out on better personal experiences.
Precisely. Harris even uses the phrase brain damage metaphorically. This person's mind is deficient compared to one capable of finding reward in ways compatible with others' flourishing. It would be objectively better if he had such a mind. He's in a deep, maybe gilded valley, unaware of the higher peaks.
Let's touch on preference versus badness. O'Connor suggests Harris reduces it all to preferences. How does Harris avoid that?
Harris pushes back hard. He says preference sounds weak, deflationary, because we use it for trivial things, coffee versus tea. But when you scale it up to the worst possible misery for everyone versus its antithesis, calling that a preference is just misusing the word. It's about fundamental states of consciousness.
So avoiding torture isn't like preferring blue. It's an objective feature of how conscious systems experience value.
Exactly. He acknowledges value is subjective in the sense that it requires a subject, a conscious mind, to exist. The objective fact of anything mattering is a subjective reality. A rock doesn't care. But for conscious beings, the difference between flourishing and suffering is objectively real within that subjective domain.
Okay, but what about religion? Studies often show religious people report higher well-being, better coping. If well-being is the goal, why did Harris write The End of Faith, attacking religion so strongly? Doesn't that seem counterproductive to his own goal?
He knows those studies. But he asks, is religion the best way? Is it necessary to believe anything on insufficient evidence or follow divisive dogma to get those benefits? His bet is no. He thinks a more sophisticated, modern, and honest conversation about reality can ultimately lead to greater, more sustainable, less divisive well-being.
He even considers a wild hypothetical, right? If believing something false was the only way to reach a peak of well-being.
Yeah, he concedes that in such an extreme case, it might be a truly useful fiction. Well-being would trump truth for its own sake. He compares it to Nick Bostrom's blackballs knowledge, so dangerous we're better off not having it. It shows well-being really is his ultimate axiom.
So what parts of religion does he think are beneficial and could be replicated secularly?
Things like community. Designated time for reflection on deeper questions, practices that cultivate positive states like compassion or mindfulness. He thinks we can have those things create something beautiful and worth providing without the dogma, tribalism, and bad ideas that often come packaged with religion.
Which leads directly into his focus on meditation, consciousness, and the nature of the self. He sees this as a path to well-being.
A crucial one. And he's clear, these aren't mystical claims about the cosmos. They're experiential insights into how our own minds work. He starts by describing our normal state of mind.
As totally pathological. That sounds harsh.
It does, but he means it specifically. He compares it to being lost in a daydream, constantly swept away by our inner monologue that automatic product of discursivity. We're rehearsing arguments, worrying about the future, endlessly talking to ourselves, often without even realizing we're doing it. We lack reality testing.
Like being asleep and dreaming, but awake.
Kind of. He calls it psychotic in a sense, this internal conversation where the speaker and audience are the same, often making no sense, and we're just helplessly carried away. It only seems normal because everyone's doing it.
So meditation is the antidote, a way to wake up from that internal noise.
It's a way to build concentration, to notice the difference between being lost in thought and actually paying attention. Thoughts themselves aren't bad, he says. They're just appearances in consciousness, like sounds or sights. Meditation helps you witness them without automatically being them, without identifying with them.
And the biggest insight relates to the self, the I.
Yes. The feeling of being a stable subject in the center of it all, the ego, he argues that feeling is itself just another appearance in consciousness. It comes and goes like any other thought or sensation.
So the self isn't a fixed thing, but a process, an experience.
That's the insight. Consciousness itself, the awareness observing all this, feels deeply impersonal. The light of awareness doesn't feel like a limited me. This recognition, he claims, dissolves the mystery of free will, thoughts just arise, and fosters deep equanimity.
How does that help with suffering? Like pain?
A lot of suffering isn't just the raw sensation, it's the mental contraction around it, the sense of, I'm suffering, I don't like this. Releasing that identification, that clenched fist of self, removes a huge layer of psychological suffering, even if the physical sensation remains. It's about changing your relationship to experience.
What about psychedelics? He mentions them as a gateway, but also misleading. How can they be both?
They're a gateway because they reliably do something dramatic to consciousness. They shake things up, provide a very different experience, proving to skeptics that the mind can be radically different. They can open the door.
But misleading because?
Because they often focus on changing the contents of consciousness. Vivid imagery, intense emotions, novel ideas. These are temporary, impermanence rules. Meditation, he argues, is orthogonal. It reveals something fundamental about consciousness itself, the underlying awareness, which is present regardless of the contents. That insight offers a more stable kind of freedom.
So it's about the nature of the screen, not just the movie playing on it.
Great analogy, yes.
But how do you convince skeptics? People like Richard Dawkins, or how Christopher Hitchens might have reacted. These insights are so internal, invisible.
Harris admits it's deeply inconvenient, that these experiences aren't publicly verifiable. You can reason by analogy like knowing music affects others deeply even if you're tone deaf. But for someone like Dawkins, who Harris says lacked sufficient interest in meditation, maybe only a profound psychedelic experience could force them to confront that their own mind holds more possibilities than they assume.
And Hitchens probably wouldn't have touched it.
Harris doubts it. Given Hitchens' views on drugs and introspection, he likely would have dismissed it all. It just shows the challenge. You can't really demonstrate these states objectively to someone unwilling to explore subjectively.
Okay, this has been a really rich exploration. We've seen Harris's bold vision morality grounded in scientific well-being, optimized like an engineering problem.
A powerful modern framework.
And we've seen Pyers's careful critique arguing it's maybe incomplete. That by flattening the ethics-morality distinction, relying on an unstated value premise, and not fully grappling with cultural pluralism or non-quantifiable values, the model loses crucial depth.
Right. Pyers isn't saying ditch the science or the goal. He's saying let's be more precise, more philosophically rigorous if we're serious about this. Ignoring these distinctions leads to confusion, maybe even bad conclusions.
And his point about precision isn't just academic nitpicking. Especially now, with things like AI ethics, where we have to define and code values, blurring lines between universal principles and cultural practices, or mistaking value choices for scientific facts that has real consequences.
Absolutely. It impacts how we debate, how we understand each other, how we build systems.
So for you listening, as you think about morality or hear these debates, maybe ask, are people using ethics and morality as synonyms? What might be lost? Is well-being the only goal on the table? Or are things like dignity autonomy meaning being considered, even if they're hard to measure?
Yeah, and what are the baseline assumptions? Are they presented as facts, or the value choices they might be? What messy, important parts of human experience resist easy quantification, but are still vital for a good life?
It pushes for a more critical, self-aware way of thinking about these deep questions.
Definitely. It's about appreciating science's role without letting it overshadow the philosophical complexities.
So here's a final thought to chew on, building on that discussion of consciousness and the self. If Harris is right that higher peaks of well-being exist, maybe beyond our current imagining, and practices like meditation can reveal a self that isn't fixed, what if the ultimate optimization problem isn't just about what we prefer, but who is doing the preferring?
Or whether that stable preferring self is even necessary for peak flourishing.
Could our pursuit of a better world be limited not just by culture, but by the very structure of our subjective sense of self, the one Harris calls potentially pathological? Something to consider as you navigate your own moral landscape. Keep questioning. Keep diving deeper.
Hey there, you arrived to the end of this episode. You can always check out my YouTube channel and also keep watching because there are 7 episodes. So you just if you enjoyed this one, hopefully you are going to enjoy the next one. I always like to remember that you can support my work by buying my books. Even though I still don't have a book about religion, which is the main topic of the podcast, I do have a book about artificial intelligence, and also I have a blog called Scientists Free from Religion on Medium, and there are several blog posts there, and you can enjoy it, you can read it, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can share it with your friends. So hopefully I can hear from you and hope you had an amazing time. So hope to see you in the next episode.